Cabinet shakeup. Lawmakers weigh in after Scott Pruitt resigns as head of the EPA. We'll tell you what they're saying and what's next for the agency. On the agenda, the U.S. ambassador to Russia believes election meddling will be a main topic when President Trump meets Vladimir Putin later this month. Changing the climate. On the third anniversary of the Pope's letter on the environment, we look at its impact. And laying off the horn. Why these runners in Spain have motivation to move quickly. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, July 6th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. We're learning more tonight about the shakeup in the Environmental Protection Agency and about former Administrator Scott Pruitt. Pruitt has been plagued with ethics concerns amid more than a dozen investigations. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tells us what's next. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. We're still waiting to hear if the congressional and federal investigations will keep probing Scott Pruitt, but some experts expect they'll keep digging even now that Pruitt is gone.
Scott Pruitt, Administrator of the EPA.
But no longer. Scott Pruitt resigns, claiming the unrelenting attacks taking a sizable toll. But one EPA whistleblower says the evidence piled up.
The flights, the first-class flights, the Delta flights, the living in the lobbyist's house, we all knew about this. And we expressed concerns, we expressed issues with it, going home every weekend, having the taxpayers pay for his trips back home to Oklahoma. We expressed this stuff.
Pruitt faced at least 14 investigations for that and more, including spending $43,000 for a soundproof phone booth in his office.
Some of the criticism is unfounded and I think exaggerated, and I think it feeds this division that we've seen around very important issues affecting the environment.
Unfounded for Pruitt, but lawmakers sure noticed.
I'm being asked, really constantly asked, to comment on security, on housing, and on travel, instead of seeing articles about your efforts to return the agency to its core mission. I'm reading about your interactions with representatives of the industries that you regulate.
The EPA's number 2, Andrew Wheeler, will serve as the acting director until the Senate confirms a new administrator. He's a former coal industry lobbyist and earlier worked for the Senate Environment Committee.
Within the White House, many have argued that Andrew Wheeler will be able to do the same sorts of regulatory rollbacks that Pruitt has done, maybe without all the baggage.
As for Pruitt, his resignation letter praises the president. I believe you are serving as president today because of God's providence. I believe that same providence brought me into your service. Now that official service ends. Pruitt could still be subpoenaed to testify here before Congress, but since he's not a federal employee, the EPA's Inspector General cannot force him to talk. A big question, does Pruitt have any future in politics? He has been considered a possible candidate to run for Oklahoma governor or U.S. Senate. Oklahoma's GOP party chairman, Pam Pollard, says they're proud of his accomplishments and still love him. Wyatt?
And we'll be watching to see if he does end up running for any other public position. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. President Trump says he'll announce his Supreme Court pick Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern.
In choosing a new justice, I will select someone with impeccable credentials, great intellect, unbiased judgment, and deep reverence for the laws and Constitution of the United States.
The president's highly anticipated decision will likely create a conservative majority on the court. It's exciting news for pro-life supporters who hope to overturn Roe v. Wade. It's also putting Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest abortion provider, on the defensive. It wants senators to confirm a justice who will protect, quote, the right to use contraception, the right to have an abortion, and the freedom to marry who you choose. Many are concerned that flies in the face of Catholic teaching, which promotes the dignity of every human life and traditional marriage. China accuses the Trump administration of starting the biggest trade war in history. The world's two largest economies today impose tariffs on each other's products worth billions of dollars. The U.S. is implementing a 25% tariff on Chinese industrial goods. Beijing says it has retaliated but offered no further details. Today marks the first in a series of possible increases on both sides. The Trump administration is confronting China after they accuse the Chinese of stealing technology or pressuring foreign companies to hand it over. The U.S. ambassador to Russia tells EWTN News Nightly that America needs to hold Russia responsible for election meddling and hybrid warfare. John Huntsman says, quote, "The fact of the matter is that we have not had the kind of conversations, direct conversations, across the table conversations about things like election meddling and malign activity that really do need to take place." President Trump is planning to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin July 16th at a summit in Finland. Huntsman expects them to discuss arms control and the conflicts in Ukraine and Syria. He says America needs to approach Russia with eyes wide open, but Huntsman adds you can't solve problems if you're not willing to talk about them. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in North Korea for the first time since President Trump's summit with Kim Jong-un. Pompeo says he will nail down specifics on Kim's commitment to rid the country's nuclear weapons. The trip comes amid skepticism about how serious Pyongyang is about giving up its arsenal. The United States is out of the Iran nuclear deal, known as the JCPOA, but today in Vienna, 5 world powers say they're trying to preserve it.
The participants recognized that in return for the implementation by Iran of its nuclear-related commitments, the lifting of sanctions, including the economic dividends arising from it, constitutes an essential part of the JCPOA.
Officials from Britain, China, France, Germany, and Russia met with top diplomats from Iran today, saying they want to send a united, determined, and strong signal about being committed to the deal. President Trump walked away from it in May. He says the plan, meant to stop Tehran from developing nuclear weapons, did not go far enough. At least 33 people, all tourists from China, are dead after a boat sank during a storm off the southern coast of Phuket, Thailand. The vessel sank after it was hit by 16-foot waves. It was carrying 105 people. At least 12 people are in the hospital and 23 are missing. It's a race against time and weather for rescuers in northern Thailand. 12 boys and their soccer coach remain trapped in a flooded cave, and more rain is in the forecast. But they've had a major setback. A diver on the rescue team died this morning while trying to help. A somber day in northern Thailand as rescue workers face the first casualty of their operation, a diver and former Thai Navy SEAL, Saman Kunan. He had just finished delivering oxygen tanks to the cavern where 12 boys and their soccer coach had been trapped inside a cave since June 23rd. Swimming underwater from the boys to an underground command center, officials say Kunan ran out of air. After his death, other rescue divers are trying to stay focused on the task at hand, keeping the boys alive.
Definitely you can feel it, that it has an effect, but we're moving on. Everybody's a professional, so we're trying to put it away and avoid it never happen again.
For days, experts have emphasized the dangers of cave diving, even for experienced divers, traveling for hours in the darkness, often with or against the flow of water through very narrow passages.
It's hard work, it's a scary sensation if you're not used to it, and even when you are used to it, it can be very scary.
Crews are still pumping as much water out of the cave as they can. Rescuers have been teaching the boys how to use diving masks in preparation for a possible escape. These workers will soon get some help thanks to tech billionaire Elon Musk. The CEO of Tesla and SpaceX says he's sending his own engineers to Thailand. Musk is also offering technology from his tunnel construction company, including equipment used for location tracking, water pumping, and powering batteries. The Thai government says Musk's engineers will arrive Saturday. A 15-year-old boy who died of leukemia is one step closer to sainthood. Pope Francis recognized the heroic virtues of Carlo Acutis. That means he will now be declared venerable, 2 steps before sainthood. Acutis grew up in Milan, Italy, and was very gifted with computers, even developing a website cataloging miracles. You can read more about his life and the process towards sainthood at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Pope Francis says all governments should strive to honor the Paris Climate Agreement in order to avoid the consequences of climate change. The comments came during a meeting with participants of a conference at the Vatican marking 3 years since the release of the encyclical Laudato Si, the Pope's appeal for humanity to be good stewards of our common home. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley attended the conference and has more from Rome.
So Laudato Si has had a massive impact on the scientific world, which is extraordinary. The scientists are really, really happy, and so much so that they're willing to help the church.
Laudato Si turns 3. Released in June 2015, Pope Francis asks the world to take swift and unified global action. Father Augusto Zampini works in the Vatican department organizing the conference. He says while the document is quoted often in the world of science, the Vatican wants action.
We need to take action, we need to take it urgently, and we need to take radical action. The Laudato Si calls for a cultural revolution. It's a change of the way we consume, we waste, we trade. That is a completely different understanding of the role human beings play in this planet.
Father Marie Benoit created an academy in France specifically aimed at teaching how people can care for the environment.
We speak a lot about nature in the ecological movements, but as Christians, we want to speak about the creation and what is the link.
In his address to the conference, the Pope stressed Laudato Si's assumption that everything is connected. A principle that lies at the heart of an integral ecology, the close relationship between the care of God's creation and the care of the human person. Organizers also invited indigenous people who can teach the Western world about living in relation with nature.
The ultimate challenge of Laudato Si is to act, and organizers here say it's time to inspire a massive movement for the care of the world. In Rome, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
Pope Francis calls on Catholics to speak out in the face of injustice towards migrants.
Politica giusta è quella che si pone al servizio della persona.
The Holy Father made the comments today during Mass with refugees and their caregivers inside St. Peter's Basilica. The Mass marked 5 years since the Pope's visit to Lampedusa, an Italian island which serves as the first destination for many African migrants en route to Europe. The Cardinal who announced the Pope Francis to the world has died.
Annuncio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam.
Cardinal Jean-Louis Taurin was the most senior cardinal deacon during Francis' election, and he served as the Vatican's interreligious dialogue chief. Taurin was best known for reaching out to the Muslim world and traveling to Saudi Arabia in April to meet the king. The French cardinal was suffering from Parkinson's and died in Connecticut, where he was receiving treatment. He was 75 years old. Coming up, why Vice President Mike Pence directed several U.S. officials to go to Iraq. And a State Department spokesman gives us an update on the state of Christians in the Middle East. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Wisconsin's Supreme Court orders Marquette University to reinstate a professor who filed a lawsuit in 2016 after he was fired. John McAdams lost his job after he wrote a blog post criticizing a student instructor he believed shut down discussion about opposition to gay marriage. The Catholic school says he was dismissed for naming the instructor and including a website that had her personal information. The Trump administration looks for ways to streamline aid to persecuted Christians in Iraq. Vice President Mike Pence met yesterday with USAID Administrator Mark Green, who recently returned from a trip to the region. He was joined by a delegation of American lawmakers and leaders, including Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback. Pence says, quote, America is committed to restoring historic Christian communities in the region ravaged by terrorism and war. Joining us now is Knox Thames, Special Advisor for Religious Minorities, speaking to us from the State Department. Knox, welcome back to the program. Can you tell us about the Christian communities in Iraq today? What do we know about what life is like right now in the Middle East for religious minorities like Christians?
Well, in Iraq, the situation is improving but still very fragile. With our global coalition to defeat ISIS, pushing that virulent terrorist organization out of the country, religious life is reemerging for these victimized religious minorities, Christians of various denominations, but also others like Yazidis. So there's a moment of hope, but their future is far from certain. That's why the United States, under the leadership of Vice President Pence, has launched a really unprecedented effort to surge resources into the Nineveh Plains to assist these communities with the difficult task of rebuilding. Just last week, Ambassador Sam Brownback and USAID Administrator Mark Green went to northern Iraq to tour those areas and to get a better assessment, and we'll be briefing the Vice President in the coming days.
What do you think now, noting all of that's happening, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing the Christians and other religious minority in the Middle East? Now, as you mentioned, now for the most part, ISIS has been defeated.
Right. It's going to be, how do we create an environment where there's space for religious diversity? There's a mentality that is really spreading around the globe of exclusivity, of either my way or the highway. So the United States, we're very committed to doing what we can to advocate for the rights of religious minorities, to talk about the benefits of interfaith tolerance and pluralism, because a society is going to be healthier, more stable, more prosperous if everyone can participate. And that means Christians, that means other faith communities have an equal footing and be viewed equally by the law as citizens vested with the same rights as others. So it's going to take education, it's going to take ensuring that governments are defending these groups, not persecuting them. And that's why we're working very hard here to try to build a global coalition of like-minded countries that can promote the rights of Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East and around the world.
And we'll continue to follow the work that you do there with the government. I want to switch gears because you also recently spoke just several weeks ago at an event called the Coptic Solidarity Conference. Tell us about that. Tell us about the issue you spoke about.
Well, Egypt is a leading country in the Arab world, the most populous country. It also has the largest Christian community, about 10 million people who identify as members of the Coptic Orthodox Church and other Christian churches. There we have a real problem with ISIS, that while they've been defeated in Iraq, they are operating in the Sinai, and we've seen over the last year a really horrific amount of attacks against Christians and also other Muslims who think and believe differently from that terrorist organization. So the United States, we stand with the Egyptian people to defeat terrorism, and we want to lend our support to make sure that these communities are protected. At the same time, we are concerned about how the Egyptian government, we think, is going too far in that effort by clamping down on all civil society groups and political dissent. And we think that's actually going to make the problem worse in the long run. The other issue is concerns about sectarian attacks against Christians in Upper Egypt and the lack of accountability. We continue to see instances of mobs forming to complain about a church operating in a small town. And when the police come in the aftermath, after houses have been burned and people being beat up, the Christians are arrested in addition to some of the Muslim attackers. And yet no one's really held accountable for that. And that's going to be a key piece to seeing stability in southern Egypt between Christians and Muslims, is that those who perpetrate violence are held to account.
So many challenges there and so many things to consider, whether we're talking about Iraq or Egypt. Knox Tame, Special Advisor for Religious Minorities at the State Department. Thanks so much for the recap.
My pleasure.
Up next, veteran Washington journalist gives us his take on Scott Pruitt's resignation and why these runners are taking danger in stride.
Para que los sacerdotes que viven con fatiga.
The Pope's prayer intention for this month, priests and their pastoral ministry. Pope Francis says we should pray for priests who experience fatigue and loneliness so that they may find help and comfort with the Lord. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference is urging senators not to use Roe v. Wade as a litmus test for judicial nominees. In a letter to senators, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo writes, "We have grave concerns about the confirmation process, as though nominees who oppose the purposeful taking of innocent human life are somehow unfit for judicial office in the United States." For more on this, we're joined by Vince Colonese, editorial director at the Daily Caller and host of Mornings on the Mall at WMAL Radio. Vince, welcome back to the program. The bishop seemed concerned about this confirmation process quickly becoming all about Roe versus Wade, whether you're for or against it. Is this justified, and what do we think the confirmation process is going to be like?
Well, I think Roe versus Wade is going to play about as big of a role as it ever has, because typically when we go through these confirmation hearings, Roe versus Wade, it comes center stage, and it's typically from people who support abortion. They don't want the right to have an abortion in the United States overturned. So that means basically the entire Democratic Party will often bring this up during a confirmation hearing in the hopes of stopping any Supreme Court justice from taking to the high court who could potentially overturn Roe versus Wade, despite the fact that there are plenty of legal scholars who believe that Roe versus Wade was already bad case law, and it's entirely possible to overturn a case that has bad precedent in the United States Supreme Court. It's been done many times.
And now there's money involved. NARAL Pro-Choice America announced a 5-figure ad buy this week targeting Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins, who's expected to be a key vote, even though she's publicly stated she'll not support any nominee who does not support established law. Why target her in particular if she didn't necessarily be against them right away?
Because first of all, Susan Collins is one of the rare pro-choice Republicans. She speaks out about that. Additionally, she has already voted yes on one of these nominees in particular, Amy Coney Barrett, who's known as sort of the Catholic nomination here that could potentially come out on Monday. She's a Notre Dame graduate. She's taught at Notre Dame. She's Catholic. She doesn't expect Roe v. Wade to be overturned, she has said, but she's also expressed some idea that she could see where the Supreme Court overturns cases based on precedent if the Constitution says something that's much more clear to her. And that's why Susan Collins, who's already voted yes on her as a circuit court judge, is being pressured to potentially vote no on her or any other justice if there's a suspicion by these abortion groups that that justice would overturn Roe versus Wade.
Okay, so we'll be watching that. Also want to ask you about the embattled head of the EPA, Scott Pruitt, resigned, of course. He was implementing the Trump administration's mandate to reduce regulations in particular. Were Pruitt's, I guess, his ethics sort of a distraction, and can we expect that to sort of continue to be a problem moving forward now with the EPA?
No, I think Andrew Wheeler, who's taking over, is not going to have the same issues that Scott Pruitt had. Were they distraction? Yes, is the answer to that. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is reasonable to ask that people who come in and work on behalf of the American taxpayer not misuse taxpayer resources. But that attack on Scott Pruitt was really a proxy attack, I think, by the Democratic Party and the left, who really wanted to take him down because he was so effective at deregulating in the EPA. So they saw his ethical lapses, the ones they could take advantage of, and they went as far as they could. They got him knocked out. But for now, I think with Andrew Wheeler at the helm, the EPA's deregulation scheme, freeing up the regulations of government so that way businesses can move full steam ahead, that's going to continue at pace.
HHS, Health and Human Services, says this week they're ready to reunite parents and children who have been separated on the border. In a tweet yesterday, the president called on Congress to fix our insane immigration laws now. Congress is back next week. Can we expect any action on immigration reform, realistically?
I will never even begin to promise that prediction because Congress always fails, typically, to achieve something, especially on immigration. But they need to. If a goal is to reunite families in this process as they continue to try and prevent illegal immigration into the United States, a whole bunch of things need to change, and it starts right within Congress. The President of the United States has done everything he can so far to reinstate those families together in this process, and now it is on Congress. Hopefully they can do something.
Immigration seems to be becoming a bigger and bigger issue as we move towards the midterm elections. Vince Cullen, editorial director at the Daily Caller and host of Mornings on the Mall on WMAL Radio. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
And finally tonight, the traditional fireworks display kicks off the running of the bulls in Pamplona, Spain. Two members of a local band, both with Down syndrome, began the festivities with the traditional launching of fireworks. The 9-day festival honors San Fermin, the patron saint of Pamplona. Thousands of attendees at the event were wearing traditional red scarves. The event draws around 1 million visitors. And I don't envy anyone, by the way, who tries running with those bulls. The fireworks display seems a bit safer. And that wraps up our newscast for tonight and for this week. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back on Monday with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.